This is NVIDIA's GP106 aka GTX 1060, one of the most successful graphics processor units launched by NVIDIA in 2016 to compete head-to-head in the sub-$250 GPU category with AMD's Radeon RX 480. In terms of compute capabilities, the GP106 is essentially half powerful compared to GP104 chipset used on the more higher-tier GTX 1080 and 1070 models. Fortunately, NVIDIA decided to not cut in half the memory interface also, and instead went with 192-bit design. Unfortunately, NVIDIA chose to differentiate from the competition in terms of memory capacity, supplying the 1060 models with 6 and 3GB VRAM instead of 8 and 4GB, similar to what AMD did with the Radeon RX 480 and 470. Despite that, the GTX 1060 offered a bit better performance at 1080p gaming and somewhat similar at 1440 resolutions, with lower power performance compared to AMD's counterpart. The success of mainstream Pascal GPUs were so extensive that ranked immediately the GTX 1060 at the top places. In this video we will travel back in time, not just to check out if the above statement is true, but also to see how the GTX 1060 held up through the years, while playing in chronological order some of the most popular games in the history of gaming industry. The protagonist of our story is the overkill ASUS ROG STRIX GTX 1060 Gaming with 6GB GDDR5 RAM, a model that guarantees the best-in-class performance for any given GP106-based graphics card. To know more about the computer parts and software were used for the tests, please check the specifications in the description below. And if by any chance you reach the end of this video sounding happy, then I will appreciate your support by pressing the like button and considering to subscribe if you haven't done so already. Having said that, sit tight because we are about to power up our DeLorean time machine and travel to 2016 for our first benchmark, playing a very well-known single MMO first-person shooter made by DICE. Battlefield 1 successfully portrayed the horrors of First World War with its amazing gameplay and the astounding graphics fidelity that continues to impress even with today's standards. You will be surprised at how many people are playing this 6-year-old game and saying,
"Yeah, go to hell. Get out of here."
to the two most recent successors of the series. Unexpected is also the amazing performance of the GTX 1060 at 1080p high preset on campaign mode, producing 95 average and 72 FPS in 1% low. The same goes for the multiplayer mode, where we observed slightly better results with the average and 1% low reaching the 94 and 79 frames per second respectively. Back to campaign mode and switching to 1440 resolution, our good start was spoiled by the 59 average and the 48 in 1% low, showing that NVIDIA never intended the GTX 1060 directly for 1440p gaming. Multiplayer mode once more gave better numbers, which is great news for every GTX 1060 owner who is looking to kill his time on the battlefield of war. In that specific case, I would recommend activating the DSR on the NVIDIA panel and lowering the resolution to the odd 2351 by 1323 so that you can enjoy both campaign and multiplayer modes at high frames without sacrificing image quality. Of course, this benchmark was only half the horse of 2016. The other half is the ID's iconic remake that transformed a true classic into a completely different game while keeping the familiar frenetic-paced action gameplay. If you are unfamiliar with the topic, the game I'm talking about is called Doom, which was given away free with every Radeon RX 480 purchase. Hence, it will be extra interesting to see how NVIDIA's counterpart will perform compared to the RX 480's results that I collected a few months ago. Keep in mind that Doom came with a new tailor-made API called Vulkan, promising game-changing performance. And back then, that was true for every AMD GPUs, but not for NVIDIA as well. That's why I stared for a while with amazement the MSI layout stats while running the game at 1080p high settings. For sure, a giant leap forward for NVIDIA drivers and how much more performance they brought to the Vulkan table. No compromising on settings even at 1440p, with the GTX 1060 pulling out 105 average FPS with 1% low staying above 80. Just for comparison's sake, I also ran the game the inferior OpenGL API, because that's what I used on the RX 480 benchmark. Yes, I know, don't blame me. blame the discriminating Doom demo. I will just lay out the comparison numbers on the screen, in case you want to know who won at the end of this rigid battle. Sorry, but the bribe was too good to refuse, and I have 4 kids to feed, so...
So what happened to number 5? Ah, shit, man. You got me. I ain't even married.
Mirror, mirror in the wall, what is the most famously stuttier game of all? And the mirror in the wall replied, "Stuttier is not a word." Mirror in the wall, shut the up, sir. The year 2070 brought with 2 of the most famous Battle Royale titles. Since then, their content is constantly kept updated with new expansions, so in a sense we are using products of the past combined with up-to-date patches, new game engines and drivers. So, does this mean that we are doing a Back to the Future hardware review? I'm confused. Therefore, I will leave the philosophical questions up to you, while I continue the benchmarks with the Battle Royale that recently went free to play, reviving its declining numbers and nearly doubling its concurrent player count. It's been 5 years since PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds debut. Many have changed since then, and some didn't. Like the outdated now Unreal Engine 4 of PUBG that remains unoptimized while running DirectX 12. In addition to many complaints on Reddit regarding this matter, we have also the benchmark numbers that the GTX 1060 produced at 1080p high settings with the average frames barely kept at decent levels while the 1% low justified their title and staying below 30. For that matter, DirectX 11 was the better alternative. If you don't count the frame rates while the screen is filled with smoke gas or while looking at the map from your private jet, then the rest of the gameplay will be considered acceptable for a competitive FPS game. I didn't even dare to play it at 4040p. I'll leave this dairy stuff for the brave ones. Now let's look at a game that, if it didn't exist, PUBG might be today's Battle Royale king. I'm talking, of course, about Epic Games' most successful entertainment product that introduced as a side expansion and became a worldwide phenomenon. 5 years later, and Fortnite still allures hundreds of thousands of gamers to its cartoonish world with the constant intrigue changes and the famous big events. Unfortunately, some of these changes brought a toll on performance with frequent and sudden frame drops. A problem that you probably can fix yourself by watching a video I made a few weeks ago, or totally bypass it by choosing DirectX 11 or Performance mode. Both rendering setups at 1080p and Pro settings work splendid with our GTX 1060, offering some high frame numbers and a stable gameplay with low latency. 2080 was the year that NVIDIA introduced the successor of the Pascal architecture. A reminder that already 2 years had passed since GTX 1060 was first launched. In spite of this, our protagonist was able to race at high frames, even with some newly arrived AAA titles, like the eye-candy Forza Horizon 4, with the magnificent landscapes, seasonal weather conditions, and the realistic day-to-night cycle. Choosing 1080p high video quality, the average breaks over 80 FPS and 1% low just below 70. Pretty sure that you can play 1440p medium to low settings with locked 60 FPS, but I don't have time for that since Lara Croft isn't getting any younger. I mean, it's been 4 years since her last wild adventures, and if I don't hurry up to the boat will swim to the what I was saying. Ah, yeah. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was and remains a well-optimized and demanding gaming title. Therefore, it is always my pleasure to play with its plentiful settings while testing the GTX 1060. At 1080p high, the GPU scores 68 on average, with 1% low staying above 59 FPS, even under some very demanding situations. Locking the frames at 60 and then enjoying the smoothest of gameplays, it will be a bad advice. Of course, some of you might consider to appreciate the beautiful visuals at 4040 resolution. In that case, I will recommend to keep the settings high, but lock at 30 FPS. worry not, the gameplay remains buttery smooth even under these frame levels. 2019 might not be remembered as one of the best years for PC gaming, still brought with some very exciting gaming titles. One of them was Apex Legends, a free-to-play battle royale shooter that came out of nowhere and carrying with a breath of fresh air on a worn-out genre. In terms of hardware requirements, a GTX 1060 is enough to reach 79 and 62 on average and 1% low at 1080p high video settings. You could go for 4040p low if you want to, but again, why would you? Another 2019 gem is the beautiful remake of Resident Evil 2 that managed to rebuild completely from the ground up the visual outdated original title. As always in computer world, beauty comes with a cost in performance. A fare that GTX 1060 is able to pay at high 1080p gaming using DirectX 11. The 83 and 72 frames per second on average and 1% low is the very proof of that. At 4040p high settings, the 31 FPS and 1% low leaves no other option but to lock the game at 30 FPS if you want to have a flawless gameplay experience. If it wasn't some very annoying black screens that occurred only on DirectX 11 and only on this game, I will never consider of using the unoptimized DirectX 12. But if you have to choose between lower frames and no frames at all, then the choice of lower performance becomes less repulsive. Talking about repulsive, I can't help thinking of 2022. A year heavily defined by global complaisance, mandatory experimental medication, and the credible profitability of pharmaceutical, technological, and gaming industry. Resident Evil has nothing to do with the year, but matches perfect with the description. However, we are visiting 2022, so let's change the gaming footage with something more representative. Like Cyberpunk 2077. Yeah, don't get confused with the suffix year at the end of the name, we are still talking about 2020. Either way, this was one of the most anticipated releases made by CD Projekt Red since The Witcher 3. As with every overhyped product, there was a huge difference between the promises and the actual release. The game of the future became very quickly the joke bug of the year. Several months later, and after a dozen of fixes and patches, and the game was finally in somewhat decent shape. However, the game engine remained resource demanding, and this is more obvious when you pay attention at the numbers. The GTX 1060 at native 1080p high settings barely kept the average at 45 FPS and 1% low above the low 30s. And that was at the non-demanding area of the world map. Walking on the crowded city center, I had to drop the settings to low, getting 47 average and 39 1% low. Not that this affects by much the gameplay experience. Cyberpunk 2077 is from the games that you can enjoy even at locked 30 FPS. Something that I will totally recommend it if you play with a 6-year-old mid-range graphics card like I do. Enabling FSR quality level, it might give you the extra FPS boost to reach the low 60s on average, but then again the image goes too blurry for my taste. A better approach for locked 60 FPS is to enable NIS with 40% sharpening and 920 resolution. Here it is, a 2020 title that didn't go to the hype of Cyberpunk 2077, still, Genshin Impact won from the beginning the hearts of many anime-style open-world RPG fans with the free-to-play model and the low hardware requirements. That's why, even at higher settings and 1080 resolution, a GTX 1060 effortlessly can produce 89 frames at average and 66 in 1% low. Here it is an example of the gameplay at 1440 resolution, high settings and locked at 30 FPS. Allow me to say, this is one of the rare moments that a flat line on a graph is good and not bad news. "2021 continued the legacy of its previous brother Plus, adapted some extra bad things of its own, one of which was the scalpers pandemic with the unreasonable graphics cards prices. A 5-year-old GTX 1060 sold for well over $350 in the used market. Bad times for PC gamers, and especially for the friends of Halo series that have been misled by the title. Dreaming may be infinite entertainment with infinite frames per second, but unfortunately the reality was quite different. And 1 year later, Halo Infinite continues to be a quite demanding game. Even at the performance-tolerable multiplayer mode at 1080p high settings, our car could hardly average 49 and lows of 38 FPS. Dropping the settings to low offered acceptable frame rate levels on average, but still the 1% lows were a minor consideration. Don't get me wrong, you can play this game even with these frames, but don't expect at competitive levels to be the king of responsiveness. Unlike Hitman 3, that for years makes the world a better place with his everlasting smile and his cheerful attitude. On this one, you will have no problem to scale the settings to high and choose 1080 resolution. The nature of this game also allows for smoothly gameplay even at 1440 resolution and lower FPS. So yeah, why not? Knock yourself out. And with that, we almost reached at the end of our time travel, and literally a few weeks before the end of 2022. The prices of the used GPUs are significantly lower now than ever before, thanks to cryptocurrency crash. So, you might have already been tempted to upgrade your ancient GPU with an old GTX 1060. My response to that is, please, hold your horses and take your decision after you watch the last two gaming benchmarks. I'll begin with one of the most ambitious gaming projects ever undertaken. If you thought that No Man's Sky was an almost impossible gaming endeavor, then you should take a look at Star Citizen, a multiplayer space trading and combat simulation game. And no, I didn't want the jackpot, I just took advantage of the free trial period to test this constantly under development title. Thus, the reason that DirectX 11 was the only option for API, and my first impression was very unimpressive. The performance of the GTX 1060 is at the limits of tolerable. The image fidelity doesn't excuse the performance stall. I don't say that the graphics are garbage, but definitely on our journey we witnessed older games with much better graphics that were less demanding. 1080p lowest settings and locked at 30 FPS, it might give you some peace of mind from the constant stutters, but even that will fail on crowded open zones. Things are getting a bit better while you pilot your spaceship, but I'm pretty sure under intensive fights the frame drops will be unbearable. Not that I had any chance to test my theory, since I had first to take 2 bachelors and 3 masters on how to pilot this thing. No time for that, so I did the next best thing. I asked HAL. HAL, start the engine.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Yeah, don't mind it. I found it myself. HAL, nuke that rock, will you?
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
HAL, use the brakes.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid...
HAL, I command you, remove this annoying message from my screen.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
You, HAL. Oh well, because I can't pilot a spaceship, it doesn't mean that I won't try another driving simulation game. Such one of the latest and greatest Formula 1 titles of EA Sports. Despite the fact that this game has some very beautiful graphics, you don't need a GPU behemoth to enjoy it. Obviously on this one I don't want to embarrass you with my driving skills, so I will demonstrate the more accurate built-in benchmark of Canadian Grand Prix on both wet and dry conditions. I don't judge, and beyond that, let me tell you that the results got me by surprise. At 1080p high settings, the GTX reaches the 85 average and never dropped below 67 1% low. 1440 resolution and the frames unavoidably drop to high 50s, however, the gameplay experience remains great. I have some considerations about how the raindrops slide upon the helmet, taking into account the speed of the car, but yeah, whatever. If you persist on the idea of 60 or nothing, FPS I mean, Then your best bet is FSR on, quality preset and 55 sharpening. So, what is the final conclusion? Does it worth to buy a GTX 1060 as a budget mainstream card? Well, if you agree to play most of the modern demanding titles at 1080p high to medium settings while updating a bit over 60 frames per second, or even playing at 1440p locked at 30 fps, then definitely the answer is yes. As we watched, heavy titles that run smoothly at low frames like Cyberpunk 2077 shouldn't pose any problem for GTX 1060. However, if your goal is to reach higher frame rates on every latest and greatest game, or to play competitively battle royale first-person shooters at high settings and very high frames on your 144Hz 32-inch 1440p monitor, then without any doubt, you should consider some higher-tier GPU alternatives. Overall, if I had to build a $300 to $400 gaming/productivity computer, a 6GB VRAM GTX 1060 and especially the ASUS ROG STRIX GTX 1060 gaming, it could be hands down one of my top choices. The GeForce GTX 10 series was too good to be true generation of chipsets. I am pretty sure NVIDIA will find it very difficult to repeat the launch of such a legendary architecture at such low MSRP prices, and the GTX 1060 is definitely among the most notable GPU releases ever. However, the above statement doesn't mean you can label this graphics card as a component that will last for the next 5 or so years. You lost that train 6 years ago. In this case, you should consider the GTX 1060 viable for modern era games, as long as games are made for previous gen consoles like PS4 or Xbox One. As things are gradually moving towards PS5 or Xbox X Series X, then this 6-year-old chipset will begin to struggle, showing how long in the tooth hardware is. Now, the most crucial question is, how did you find this nostalgic time travel? Did you reach the end of it safe and happy? And if you did you press the like button? Did you consider to subscribe if you haven't done already? Let me know in the comments below. Regardless, thanks for watching and see you on the next one.